Hi everybody, this is Heather with North Central Washington Libraries, and today we are interviewing Faye Peebles from Wolf Haven. So I am going to ask her a bunch of questions about working at that organization. Um, so first I wanted to ask you, Faye, where is Wolf Haven at?
Hi, Heather. Wolf Haven is just south of Olympia. And let's see, you guys are Central Washington. So Olympia is at the bottom of the Puget Sound, and we're just south of there, about
Oh,
20 minutes or so south of the capital.
cool. What is your position at Wolf Haven?
My position is education coordinator. So that means that if groups want any kind of Wolf Haven experience, they plan it with me. And that also means that the parts of those experiences, I'm the one that creates them and updates them. So education programs, table materials, groups coming to the sanctuary to see the wolves, that all goes through me.
Very cool. That sounds like an awesome position.
It is. It really is.
What is a wolf sanctuary and how does it differ from other places where you can see wolves in captivity?
So the second half of your question is actually a lot easier than the first half. So the way that a sanctuary, or at least Wolf Haven Sanctuary, differs is we are definitely there for the wolves first. A lot of places like zoos and other facilities, people are their top priority. Not to say that the animals are not their priority, but their focus is getting people in there, getting people to learn, things like that, sharing the animals with people. Whereas in our sanctuary, everything we do is wolves first. And a lot of that is because our wolves do come from not so great situations sometimes. And so yeah, that's the biggest difference is we are there for the wolves, and most other places where you can see wolves are there for the people.
Okay, that's a good answer. So this kind of might be repeating some of that, but does a sanctuary benefit humans and the wolves?
It can, yeah. So one of the biggest ways that we benefit the wolves is that they get to live as wild as possible. Our rescued wolves can't go back out in the wild. They were never in the wild. Most of them come from generations of captive wolves, and so they have the instincts but not the skills. So putting them out in the wild not only puts their life in a pretty rough spot because they don't have those skills, but they've also gotten habituated, they've gotten used to people. Even if they don't want to be around us, they've gotten used to us. They know that we're where their food comes from. And so it benefits them in that they do get to be themselves, whatever that looks like. On the other side of that, it does benefit people because we can give people the information to maybe help those captive wolves not be in their situations anymore. And so we can share education and what we've learned about wolves in captivity to help folks understand why they don't make good pets, why wolf dogs don't make good pets, and how also to protect the wolves that we do have in the wild. So we can provide the education and the information that people are looking for, at the same time providing a safe, more wolf-focused space for the wolves, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. So my next question, I guess, is some of it has been answered already, but it's who are the wolves and where do they specifically come from? And then the third part of that was, will they ever leave? But you've just answered that in your previous question.
So it's a little bit tricky at Wolf Haven. We actually have two different groups of wolves. We have a group of wolves that we call our SSP animals, our species survival program animals. And what that means is we are part of endangered species survival plans that are done, they're set up by the federal government to bring species on the edge of extinction back. And so we've got Mexican gray wolves and we've got red wolves. And those guys are one group in that they don't belong to us. We take care of them, we house them. If they need to be moved to a different facility, we're part of how to make that happen, but they're managed by the federal government and by their individual programs. So those guys, most of what we talk about as our rescue captive wolves does not include those guys. So That's one group. The other group come from all over the place. We have some of our gray wolves that are captive. We call them rescue, but some of them are just in situations that they need new homes. For instance, we have one that came from a nature center in North Carolina. She was well taken care of. The problem came in when she was put in an enclosure, or I guess other wolves were put in her enclosure that she didn't get along with. And the facility didn't have space to appropriately care for her separate from those two. And so they got a hold of us. So not all of them are bad situations. Some of them are just situations that need to be changed. But we do have a lot of our animals come from private ownership where they were kept as pets. And by the time they're 2 or 3, they are clearly not the same as dogs, and they are clearly not okay as pets. Some people learn that faster depending on the animal. We have one that came to us at 6 months old, and we were his 5th home. And that's because you can't keep a wolf pup in an apartment. You can't keep a wolf pup in your house. They're not built to live inside with people. They're built to live in the wild. And so a house is just another wild space to them, and they treat it that way. And some of our animals come from worse situations even than that. We have some that came from a roadside attraction in Alaska where they were kept on 8-foot drag chains. And that's the extent of their space for their lives. And they were kept outside all the time. They were kept kind of on the verge of hungry all the time, so people could pay extra to hand feed them. And that's not a good situation for any animal, let alone an animal that's supposed to be wild. And then we do have some that came from a fur farm. Believe it or not, fur farms do still exist in parts of the US. And one of those places was shut down by the state's government, not Washington, the state that they were in. And we ended up taking a couple of those wolves. So they were literally saved from fur farming. So our wolves come from lots of different places. Those guys, like we've already kind of talked about a little bit, will never be able to go back into the wild because they have become used to, though not comfortable with, used to humans. Where those other SSP animals, the Species Survival Program animals, some of them could potentially be put into the wild. And so for that reason, they're handled different, they're fed different, they're managed different, even on site at Wolf Haven. They have very, very little contact with humans, even less than our captive rescue wolves do. And those guys don't have much. And so our SSP animals are kept way off of where the public can see them. They're usually watched through cameras, not by people, not by our animal care staff walking back there. And typically they're the ones that get our roadkill donations when we get roadkill. Okay. So keep them as wild as we possibly can. So
cool. Is it illegal what people do with the wolves, like in Alaska, like having the roadside shows or whatever? Is that like an illegal thing to do?
Depends on the state, and even sometimes depends on the county. In Alaska, the facility was shut down eventually because they had wolf dogs, and wolf dogs kept like that was illegal in Alaska, not because they had wolves on chains. Mm-hmm. So Alaska, the rules are much more stringent about wolf dogs. In Washington state and most of the lower 48 states, because gray wolves are still on the endangered species list, unless you have a permit like we do to house them, it's illegal to own a wolf in any capacity. Zoos have those permits, other wolf rescue sanctuary facilities have those permits, but if you don't have that permit, you're not allowed to, it's illegal to have them.
It's illegal to have a wolf dog as well?
The wolf dog, again, it's based on state and it's based on county. In Washington state, Thurston County, where Tenino and Olympia are, it is legal to own a wolf dog. It is illegal to own a wolf still, but it's legal to own a wolf dog. It's also legal to breed and sell wolf dogs. In Pierce County, just north of there, it is illegal to own, sell, or breed them. So in Washington, at least it goes by county. And part of the struggle with that is wolf dogs don't necessarily fit into the wolf category when it comes to like endangered species laws, but they also don't really fit into a dog category where it comes to, leash laws and fencing laws and things like that. So they spend all of their life kind of in limbo between the two worlds, even when they're in the human world, which is part of the problem with a wolf dog in your house.
Yeah.
So.
So you've talked about the kind of wolves that you have at your sanctuary. How many are there?
Currently, we have 61 wolves, 2 coyotes in Tenino. And in our facility in Montana, which we acquired about 2 years ago, there are approximately 34, 35 wolves out there. That place is completely closed to the public, and we acquired it as a way of giving those wolves security basically for a forever home until they pass away. It was managed by another foundation, and the family couldn't take care of them anymore. They were not able to. And so they sought us out. They sought some other people out too, and they picked us to carry on taking care of those animals. In Tenino, the 61 include those SSP red wolves and Mexican gray wolves. And the others we consider just northern gray wolves, the wolves and the wolf dogs. We treat them kind of the same because it's really hard to tell them apart in their subspecies, except for the Mexican wolves. The Mexican wolves have a very unique coat markings. Everybody else, some people think Arctic wolves are white. Well, Arctic wolves are typically white, but so are Rocky Mountain wolves or timber wolves, so you can't tell by looking at them. It's really geography based.
Are they all, so Rocky Mountain wolves and timber wolves, are they all like subspecies of the gray wolf? Okay.
Yeah, so that's why we kind of just consider them all northern gray wolves. And there's debate on how many subspecies. It's just like anything science, it's always changing. Right now, the Federal Fish and Wildlife Department considers there to be 5 subspecies of gray wolf. So that's kind of what we base it on. But in times over history, there's been as many as 20 or more subspecies just in North America. And it really is, though, genetically, you can take the DNA of any of these wolves, and there's not a lot of difference to identify them with. So at Wolf Haven, because they're all from generations of captivity, we just consider them northern grays.
What are the 5 different subspecies?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and I should. It's hard to remember sometimes because if you go it's just like soda and pop. If you go to the East Coast, they call them something different. But basically, it's the Mexican gray, the Arctic. There's timber. There's an eastern gray, and then there's one in the middle that gets named lots of things. And sometimes it includes the Rocky Mountain wolves, and sometimes it's the Great Plains. And so, like I said, it's like soda and pop. It depends on where you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, but basically it's the way north of North America, and then kind of the West Coast, East Coast, Central North America, and then the Mexican grays are kind of South US, Southwest US, and then Mexico.
Okay, cool.
So, if that makes sense.
And so, yeah, definitely. And so you said that you fed the ones that potentially might get released someday roadkill. What do the other ones eat?
So we get roadkill every once in a while, and for the most part, we try to get those to our SSP animals. Sometimes we get an overwhelming amount at one time, and we can feed it to more of them. Ideally, that's what they would get all the time. But otherwise, they get kind of a mix of ground beef. They get turkey necks. They get chicken. Every once in a while we get a collection of salmon, either from Pike's Place Fish Market. The salmon that they toss, they can't sell, and so they'll so they'll deep freeze it for us and then send it to us. So we stock up, and then all the wolves get salmon. Occasionally we get some salmon donated from some of the local native people. If they have an overabundance or something, or they'll send us small chunks, and the wolves get a little salmon treat that's pretty local. And then we also have what we call enrichment. And in the wild, wolves keep their brains going. They're really, really smart creatures, so they get bored if they're not doing something. But they keep their brains going just by investigating new things in their territory. If a new creature walks through or something, it's going to leave lots of different smells behind.
Mhm.
And some of our enrichment items that we give them in captivity to keep their brains up can be considered food. And one of those is watermelon. So our wolves get watermelon. It's not something that's going to sustain them, but they do eat it, and it's different for them. But they also get hard-boiled eggs, usually around Easter. Sometimes they get decorated with edible decorations, and then the wolves get to eat hard-boiled eggs. Sometimes, though, some of them will roll the egg around and take the shell off, and some just eat the whole thing. So personalities come out. But
Yeah.
one of the coolest things that we feed them is a Thanksgiving turkey stuffed with all the fixings and all of the food except for the hard-boiled eggs. All the food is raw, and so they get a giant raw turkey stuffed with everything in it. They get mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, green beans, apples, cranberry sauce, and they usually all get one Brussels sprout. And at
What?
both of our facilities, none of them eat the Brussels sprout.
Even if you mix it in with like the potatoes or something, they find it and they leave it.
Yep. Yep.
That's
They will leave it. Even our wolves that are so food motivated that they eat the whole thing in within 10 minutes, yeah, they'll leave that one Brussels sprout.
Can we start a challenge for everybody watching this? Try to feed your dog a Brussels sprout and see if it'll eat it.
That is a really good challenge.
I'm
I
gonna go
don't know
buy
if
some.
that's
Yeah, I know for sure one of my dogs would just stick her nose up at it, but the other one, she eats carrots, so maybe.
that would be interesting. That might be something that wolves and dogs either have in common or don't have in common.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
sure.
Go feed your dog a Brussels sprout if you're watching this. See what they do. I'm interested. So at the sanctuary, do you have a favorite like single wolf at all?
I've had a few favorites over the last few years, and unfortunately, they have all passed away because that's part of life at a forever sanctuary. Most of our wolves are older. Right now, in fact, just yesterday, one of our animal care managers let me know we have 75% of our wolves are either over 10 or under 4.
Oh, okay.
And most of the time in the wild, a wolf life is maybe 6, 7 might be pushing it. And so the
Mhm.
fact that I believe we have like 16 or 17 animals over the age of 10 means that we we have our animals for quite a while usually, and then we lose them pretty regularly. They pass away, usually to old age, because they're not meant to be as old as they are in captivity. We've had them where we have, in fact, currently we have one we believe to be 18,
Wow.
right? So she is 3 times the age she would be in the wild. Well, so their bodies start to deteriorate. So all of us get hooked to one for whatever reason as our favorite, and invariably they pass away.
Hmm.
So I've stopped getting favorites, and now I just enjoy all of them.
Hmm.
So
That's
yeah.
a good strategy to adapt. Yeah. So out of all the wolves there, like I know you have the two separated, but do they hang out in like one pack then? Or are they in like separate enclosures? Does it depend?
So for the most part, they're in pairs.
Okay.
In the wild, unrelated wolves, more than like a male and a female, won't come together and form a pack, a family group, and hang out together. Wolves are always, they're one of those creatures, one of those things in nature where there's never an always or never. So it's possible that that happens somewhere, but for the most part, they won't come together like that. You might get two sisters that link up with a male, but again, those sisters are related. So in captivity, putting a lot of unrelated adult wolves, because we almost usually always get them as adults, in one enclosure can cause lots of problems.
Okay.
There are some facilities that put unrelated or unrelated wolves together, but it's almost never as adults. Usually they introduce a pup. So at Wolf Haven, because we get them individually usually, and because their backgrounds are not what we would ideally hope for a wolf to have as a background usually, we do pair them up in just male-female pairs. And it's based on personality to the best of our ability. Just like people, sometimes they don't get along with each other. So we try to pair them up where they're going to be at least companions with each other.
It's like a match.com for wolves.
Kind of, yeah, yeah. It doesn't always have to be a love connection, but at least okay, I'll put up with you as my roommate connection.
Perfect.
Every once in a while, we get two sisters that come to us together, and we'll leave them together as long as they can get along. We have had a couple of family groups, mom and dad and pups come, and we keep them together as long as we can. But in the wild, they would reach 2, maybe 3 years old and disperse. They would leave their pack to go start their own family. In captivity, they can't, obviously. And so our animal care staff has to watch and pay attention as the pups get older. And if aggression starts to be a normal thing, then basically we have to help them disperse. The nice thing is our animal care staff tries to, depending on the rest of the sanctuary at the time, they try to separate them so they're close enough they can still at least hear and see their family. And that's a bigger deal for some of our SSP animals when they've got multiple generations of pups, which is what they would have in the wild. And they don't always go very far. Sometimes the wolf pack in the wild, the family right next door is related because the daughter or the son only went there, found a mate, and they've got a territory right next door. So especially when we separate the bigger family groups, they try to keep them within a reasonable distance of each other. Right now, we've got a red wolf family through the SSP program. They have had 12 pups over 2 years. And as the pups got older and they needed to be separated for that potential aggression, most of them are still within like next door enclosure, which is pretty cool that we were able to do that.
Yeah.
And they go looking for each other sometimes too. They'll pop up over the fence and try to smell each other. So.
Cool. Do we have wolf packs here in Washington?
We do. Currently, we have 26 packs. Those 26 packs consist of a minimum of 145 wolves in Washington. And the Department of Fish and Wildlife in Washington says minimum because they know there's no way they can see all the wolves. If they're out counting and a pack gets aware that they're there, chances are the pack's going to disappear and they've only seen half the pack. So they say minimum. They also don't typically see the solo wolves that are walking around looking for a mate. It's really hard to tell when you're come across a individual wolf track versus a pack track because the pack will walk in the footsteps of the one in front of them. And so you can't tell how many wolves have walked that path. You can just tell there was one. So they say minimum, but a pack in Washington also is only 2 wolves, and it's 2 wolves traveling together. It could be a mother and daughter. It could be 2 sisters. It could be a father and son. It doesn't mean that pair is going to have pups. And so we also pay attention in Washington to breeding pair, and breeding pair is raising 2 or more pups to the end of that year that the pups were born. So right now we have 10 breeding pair in Washington, and most of all of that is up in Northeast Washington. Kind of, if you split Washington in thirds, it's the top of the far east third. That's where most of them are.
Very interesting. I've heard that there is a wolf pack between Blewett and Mission Ridge, but
yes.
I haven't. Do you know anything about that one? That would be the closest one to Wenatchee, but we have, at least for our system, we have branches all over the central Washington.
Yeah, so Wenatchee, it's Teanaway, and I can never say the other one. I feel really bad because a lot of the names of the packs are location based, and a lot of those locations are native, and I hate butchering the native names. It's Naaman or something like that. But those 2 packs seem to be pretty self-sustaining without a lot of trouble with humans. They occasionally, I think Teanaway has butted up against some sheep ranches, but for the most part, because there's not a lot of wolves in that area, they've got plenty of space and plenty of elk and deer in that area. So they've been relatively conflict-free when it comes to people, for the
Good.
most part. Up in the Northeast, that's a little bit different story with the wolf packs being so many, and then the cattle ranches being so many, and the terrain is difficult. It's a really difficult area to manage from any point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So.
So my next question is, so should people be afraid of wolves at all?
Afraid, I would say no. Respectfully treating them as the wild animals they are, I would say yes.
Mm-hmm.
If a wolf, every once in a while we hear about a wolf attacking people, and in fact there was one in a park in the middle of North America. I can't remember if it was a Canadian park or a US. It was right along the border there. And that was a single wolf that was not in good health. I believe they figured out that that one had not probably eaten in a really long time. And so he was by himself looking for easy prey and happened upon a campsite. But that's typically the way it is. It's usually single wolves, and it's usually something is wrong with them. Either they're sick or they have not eaten in a really long time, so they're going for the weakest prey they can find. But for the most part, wolves are not going to attack us. And even if you do get close to one or one gets close to you, it's probably because it's curious. Remember, I said they are intelligent animals. They can be extremely curious until they figure out that we're humans. And then they don't want anything to do with us.
Mm-hmm.
If you're ever in wolf territory and you hear what sounds like a weird dog bark or a huff, that's a wolf telling you you're too close. You're stressing them out. You're too close to their food. You're too close to their den and pups. Typically, wolves will tell humans and wolves that you're in their territory and they're not happy by vocalization. They'll howl, they'll do that bark huff. They will probably know you're there well before you know they are, and they're going to tell you that they don't like what you're doing, and then they're going to, for the most part, leave you alone.
Okay.
So if you see one in the wild, count yourself lucky because it doesn't happen very often, and then back out of the area and give them their space, and you'll be
Yeah.
fine.
I don't think I've never heard the huff. I've never happened upon a wolf in the wild, and I hike regularly. So, all right. So the next question that I have is, how can people see the wolves in the sanctuary? Can they visit? What does a typical visit look like?
So right now we are currently closed due to COVID,
Mm-hmm.
and we are for the foreseeable future. But when we are open, people can come visit our sanctuary. We're most of the year we're open Saturdays and Sundays, and then in the warmer months we're open Friday through Monday. And I say most of the year because we do close down in February and March for breeding season. Our rescues don't have pups, but they still go through the actions and the hormones of breeding season. Um, when you come to Wolf Haven, and right now we are almost 100% reservation based, and that's to help us kind of maintain the numbers that come through the sanctuary for the wolf's sake, but it also more ensures our public visitors get on a visit. Because we have limited visits, we don't want people hanging out and never getting on one. So we go to reservations now. That typically looks like a guided walking tour, walking visit through part of our sanctuary. A lot of our sanctuary enclosures are off limits even to staff because the wolves that are in them are more likely to get stressed, or they had, again, they came from rough backgrounds, some of them. And so we want to give them as much space as we can. So even some of our staff, like myself, I can't go back and see just any of the wolves that I want to.
Mm-hmm.
So there's about 6 enclosures right now that are on that visit, and you go through with a volunteer guide, and you learn about the wolf in the enclosure, and then a little bit more just kind of about wolf biology and ecology as you go. And you get to hang out and see the wolves if they choose to be seen. They've all got enclosures that have bushes and things where they can disappear from us if they want to. And we don't do tricks or treats to have them come up and see, because again, we're a sanctuary. We're there for them, not for people.
Yep.
Typically, though, if you come in the morning and you don't come in the summertime, you can see the wolves.
Okay, cool. Good to know.
Yeah.
And then last question, and we'll probably have to wrap it up real quickly. But so are wolves like dogs?
Wolves are That's a difficult question. Wolves have a lot in common with dogs, or I should say, dogs have a lot in common with wolves. Wolves, no matter how you look at how wolves and dogs came to be, wolves came first.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot in common. They are related to each other. A lot of times we talk about them as cousins, but that's about where it stops. So, where dogs rely on humans for everything, even abused dogs look to their humans for food, for shelter, for protection. Wolves don't look to us for anything. Even in captivity, they would rather, and they do rather, look to the other wolves in their enclosure for all of that. Even if the wolves at Wolf Haven, some of them have been there almost their entire lives, they still are not going to look to us for anything. They're going to look to their enclosure mate first.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the biggest difference is dogs were built to be around people, to rely on people, to be companions for people. Wolves were built to be with other wolves. There's a really cool study that was done about puzzles, and wolves were given puzzles and dogs were given the same puzzles, like treat puzzles or whatever. Wolves finished it in much less time than the dogs, not necessarily because they're smarter, but because they rely on themselves.
Mm.
And dogs kept looking to their humans to see if they were doing it okay, or if they were okay that they were doing. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Yeah. And owning a dog versus owning a wolf or a wolf
Oh,
dog.
it's not
Don't
even.
do it. Just don't do
No,
it.
no, that's why we exist, is because people have owned wolves and wolf dogs and think it's a good idea. We've got a wolf that dug through a living room wall because she was left at home and she was bored one day. We've got another one that was transported by our staff in a dog kennel, in the plastic ones. On the drive to Wolf Haven, they had to pull over and emergency duct tape it because she had punched through the thick plastic on those
Mm.
carriers. They're stronger than most dogs, and part of that is the instinct for their survival. They they mark their territory by peeing and pooping everywhere, including in your house. Again, they don't see the house as any different than the wild, so they're going to treat it the same. They're not meant to live with us. And wolf dogs are in that weird state of limbo. Sometimes they'll respond as a wolf and sometimes they'll respond as a dog, and you never know which response you're going to get. And so
Mm-hmm.
they're even almost more dangerous as a pet than a wolf, because at least with a wolf, you know how they're typically going
Yeah.
to respond. But neither one of them make a good pet. And that pretty much goes for any wild animal. They're not meant to be around us. They're not meant to be
Yep.
restrained by anything we put them in. And they'll try to get out, or they'll ignore the restraints completely and do what they need to do.
So just don't own wild animals, people, and
Right.
we'll be good.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm going to wrap it up because I think we're getting to the end of the recording session. But thank you, Faye. It has been a privilege talking to you. This has been a really awesome interview.